Okay, so a case study, since I'm in the process of doing my research, and the numbers you're going to see are preliminary results, they're not final. And I also want to say that I have French examples in the PowerPoint. I might not be able to translate everything for you and give you an even better, clearer idea of what I'm looking at, but the title is A Corpus-Based Evaluation of the Common European Framework Vocabulary, so I'm looking at lots of words, for French teaching and learning. Okay? So this little adventure started in this place, which happens to be my hometown, the place where I was born, and you see these rivers. This river flows all the way to the Rhine River that goes all the way to the Baltic Sea, and if you can go all the way to the Mediterranean or even to the Atlantic using all these rivers. And why do I say that? It's because that town is called Strasbourg, like the crossroads, and that's also a place that headquarters some of the key institutions of the Council of Europe, the Language Policy Division. And here you have the European Parliament, and here's that river again that flows into the Rhine. Here is the council of some of the buildings of the Council of Europe, here again, and here's the International Institute for Human Rights. They're all housed in Strasbourg. So, so that's where the adventure began before coming to BYU. I had the opportunity to work in the education system, the secondary education system, and I witnessed something happening. So the context, there was an effort to standardize language teaching and learning to assess language learning in Europe and make it comparable. And to do so, production of task-based vocabulary profiles for all European languages. So like lists of words by proficiency level, and an implementation of the language policy in these different countries, mainly in the secondary education system and in higher education, to allow equivalences and the flow of ideas and people from one country to another. For example, with programs like Erasmus, where students, higher education students, can go study in Germany, French students in Germany, and so forth, all over Europe, if there are specialties that they're going to be able to pick up better in Germany, for example, if they're French, and so forth. So to encourage all this flow of ideas. But of course, you've got to be up to it linguistically. Because if you're going to study in Germany, you're going to have to follow the classes in German. If you're going to study in France, you're going to be able to, you have to know that you're going to be able to follow these classes in French. So, so they've developed these portfolios of languages where students can self-assess if they're able to perform certain tasks by level, and passports to also document how far they are with each European language. So that's the context.
So they can get to a certain level in a language and then get a certification for that?
Right, that's what they're trying to accomplish. And test developers also focusing on developing their tests according to the levels that have been outlined by the Council of Europe Language Policy Division.
Sounds like a badge system.
So So here we go. I'm not expecting you to read any of this, but that's what's in the portfolio. So it shows you, here are all the levels, A meaning the beginning, and so on, progressively to, like native-like proficiency. Yes?
So the sole measure of achievement of a language level, is that just the vocabulary?
No, but vocabulary is, a key ingredient to this, because there's self-assessment in listening, reading, speaking, writing, and descriptions of, what the proficiency should be like. But these descriptions have been supplemented by lists of vocabulary that are referential to each of these proficiency areas. Okay? Yes.
Can the language be operational without vocabulary?
You answer the question.
No, you are the
I don't think
professional,
so.
you are the expert, so I'm just following up her question. Can the language be operational without a vocabulary?
Well, I would say no. That's my quick answer.
Well, you're operational, you're going to be operational in different contexts depending on your vocabulary. The
Right.
syntax, the grammar spans across every context, but the contexts in and of themselves require their own grammar. That's the difficulty with assessing language in any way, shape, or form,
Yeah.
because in order to determine somebody who's really proficient throughout the language, you have to interview them for a week.
Right.
Now, these 5 areas of competence,
Yeah.
and then the levels of competence.
Yeah.
Could you give us an example of what is in each box, maybe?
I can write a short, simple postcards, sending holiday greetings. I can tell, these descriptions are task-based. I'm going to expand on this a little more. I can't, be too detailed about everything, but they're task-based. So the vocabulary that was picked was based on the tasks and notions, and I'll show you later. So I'll move on. But it gives you an idea of the context. Here, it applies also to teachers. That's one rubric that I was asked to use to assess my students in middle school. And again, you have the levels, and you have the different areas, and that's for oral production. So there are rubrics for each areas of linguistic skills and rubrics and so forth. And here you decide whether you're going to move the students to the next proficiency level based on these rubrics and these descriptions. And I'm looking at the vocabulary that's attached to all of this. Okay? So here's a quick overview of what I've prepared and wanted to show you. So some of the main questions that I was asking myself were does the vocabulary that's presented at all these levels prepare students of French to read, write, and speak French, at these levels? And does it actually prepare them to function adequately in advanced studies if they go to France for higher education, or if they have professional activities with their French colleagues, etc. So that's what I wanted to find out. And I operationalized that question into a research question. To what extent do the French types and lemmas, I'm going to define that, contained in the European French vocabulary profiles overlap with the most frequent types and lemmas of a recent French dictionary, frequency dictionary, and a large-scale French newswire corpus. enormous. Okay? And here's what we're looking at. So here's the, this is the CEFR standing for the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, here for French. And I've brought something I wanted to show you. So here's one of the manuals, here's one of the profiles. That's the one for B1. There's one for A1, A2, B2. Okay, here's the frequency dictionary of French published recently. Okay, so that's the frequency dictionary of French, and that's the French giga, it's the giga corpus of newswires. So I'm looking at 7 different areas. The core, so all the where all intersect. I'm looking at the intersection of these two, these two, these two, and then what's unique and no overlap, as you see. Okay. So my unit of analysis is either the type, or they're both the type and the lemma, and I'm going to do descriptive analysis overall by proficiency level, by frequency ranking, by register, spoken and written, and then rank order correlations, and analyzing the discrepancies by proficiency level, okay, using all these tools. Yes?
Sorry, I probably missed this, but who did you say created the language profile for the Common European Framework?
They are language pedagogue experts that were commissioned by the Council of Europe, the Language Policy Division. They represent all the governments of Europe, the Council of Europe. So they have experts that work on the English language, experts that work on Italian, Spanish, all the European languages, and produce similar volumes as a reference for users, teachers, learners, test developers, etc., etc. Okay. So the rationale behind all this is that learners and teachers need to focus first on vocabulary they're most likely to encounter in real life usage. So the reason why I would want to look at the most frequent words, for example. And the French vocabulary profiles were not tested against large corpora of French, and we don't know how representative they are. Okay? So that's what I did to show some of the key words in the dissertation. And I'm going to explain some of the words so that helps you put things in context. So the levels I've already described to a certain extent, but they're categorized proficiency standards. And you see, you've already seen A1, A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, and that's what they're equivalent to in the English or American system with ACTFL, if you're familiar with that. They have similar, but they're not totally corresponding one with another. So there are the problems there. But so the basic, and I'm looking mainly at the basic learner and what they call independent learners, category A and B. Okay. Then profiles, I already talked about it a little bit. So in French they're called le niveau A1, le niveau meaning level. In English you might have come across these words. That's breakthrough, is equivalent to the niveau A1, way stage, niveau A2, and so forth. And they have similar profiles for Italian or other languages. Okay? Then task-based, related to one branch of the communicative approach, that was the movement that started in the 70s to teach and learn languages with a can-do concept, so that's task-based, and notional, so this is hybrid. There's task-based and notional. I'll show you what the notions are later on. Usage-based, that's based on frequency. What are the words that are most that you are likely to see most often in a text? Corpus-based, based on corpus linguistics and all the methodologies that are used to analyze large bodies of text. And coverage is a definition where the ideal would be that if you're like a fluent reader, you would not know one word out of 50 reading a text. That's the ideal when you're a learner of a foreign language. Okay.
Françoise,
Yes.
when on the previous slide, when you're talking about task-based, does that mean that the assessment of competence is actually a performance test?
It could be, yes. But some of them are just focused on vocabulary. And so that would be, do you know this type of vocabulary or don't you?
So it's not where the kind of a test necessarily where they have to read a passage or speak in a conversation.
That could be a test. I mean, it depends on what
Are the tests developed now?
Some of them are developed, yes. Especially in English, there are quite a few tests, but they proceeded differently than for the French language. And they used large mega corpora to come up with their profiles, which they didn't do for French. Okay, so here to further explain what a lemma is, it's base word representing all inflections by part of speech. So, for example, in English, work, okay, the verb work has all these inflections. So that's so the lemma would be work. So when you count, that's important for counting, because when you count, you only count that, but it implies all of this. And so in French, travailler, which is the translation, would have all these inflections. So when you count, see the implications. So ratio of 42 to 5. So that has lots of ramifications right there. So it's very graphic right here. It's crowded, but it's quite graphic. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I necessarily agree with that comparison of 42 to 5, because in some ways these inflections of the lemma are applications of rules. In English, to make a verb past tense, typically we add ed to the end. So you don't need to memorize worked. And in French, the same thing. You have 6 basic conjugations in each tense.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to memorize travailler and travailler. You can actually, you're just applying the rule to that.
Well, not necessarily, because there are irregular forms, etc., etc. So you can't assume that knowing this word, you will know everything else. You can't assume that knowing this word or this word, you will know all the other words that are attached to it. And so that's something to consider. And then for type, so it's an individual spelling of a unique string of characters separated by punctuation. I'm only looking at single word units. I'm not looking at compounds and things like that. So in English, in English, you'd have all these words related to work, and even more maybe. So these are 10 types. And then in French, you would have all these words related to this word, which would be inflections and derivations. Right, so that adds to the count. And to the learning you might have to do of French words. So here is another slide that shows what kind of research has been done to see how many lemmas. I guess you would know by the type of counts you have here that it's not types, it's lemmas. And that was in Britain. Milton did this research, and that's like over a span of 7 years, so they were already in at university level, like about mean of 2,000 lemmas. But you don't know whether all the inflections were learned in the process, because these are like extrapolations, estimates based on scores that don't inventory all the possible lemmas or all the possible types that you would want to learn associated to the lemmas. Okay? Does that make sense? And there's also lots of differences between the counts that some researchers give and the counts that other researchers give, and also differences between languages, like that's English, that's French, that's Spanish, and by level. So there are problems with counting and what units and how were they, how did the researchers come up with those counts. Any questions about that?
Now, when you say number of words identified, does that mean lemmas or types?
See, that's what you have to sort out. But here, some of the, I guess here is the short answer. The data is very, very heterogeneous. So there are lemmas, there are types, there are multi-word expressions that have been counted as one.
Phrases.
So yes, phrases and so forth. So you've got to sort all that out and make sure you can compare things. And at this point, you can't. Okay, so the primary sources, as I have mentioned earlier, the Common European Framework of Reference Profiles, but that represents for French less than 7,000 lexical units. However, as I said, it could be types, lemmas, multi-word expressions, and so forth. Then the frequency dictionary, the corpus, the initial corpus was 23 million words. But they've been reduced to the 5,000 most frequent words with frequencies and other coefficient that you can see in the dictionary. And then the French gigaword corpus, that's close to 1 billion words in its third edition. So it covers about 15 years of French news wires from these two agencies.
Françoise?
Yeah.
It seems what you're doing here then, at least from an instructional design point of view, you're trying to characterize a body of content in some way. You're trying to divide up the things that can be known.
Right.
Is that?
Yes, and to validate, I'm trying to validate the profiles because they haven't been tested against any big, huge corporate.
I wonder why you use the newswire text, because as far as I know, news the content of the news is more geared toward the advanced learners, and the vocabulary is more advanced, the grammar is more advanced, and I feel like it's not, I guess, if you think about learning a foreign language and being able to understand the news is very difficult. You have to reach a certain level, at least intermediate. So I wonder why you...
Because of the sheer mass of words. There's over, you'll see later, there's over 2 million types. And so the most frequent words are bound to be the more general vocabulary, French vocabulary. The less frequent words are going to be more technical, more specialized. But I want to look at like the more frequent ones that are going to emerge and be at the top of the list. So here's like a breakdown of the counts, but they're like, I still need to do, double checking, verification. But that's how many words, and they haven't been converted into types. And some, they're mainly lemmas. They haven't been converted into types, or some of them are multi-word expressions. So they're not accurate at this point, but it gives you an idea of how many and when.
So, do I understand that under quantity of lexical input, under niveau A1, that's the number of vocabulary words that you, or phrases, that you would expect them to be able to know, or
That's what the, so
that's the criteria?
that's what you find when you start inventorying all these words from one of these books. And so even though there, no one demands from a teacher to teach these words, that's the words that are in there.
And that's what the text might contain.
And that's what the text might contain. And so I want to get to the numbers and the counts to see, whether they're actually progressive, whether they, how many there are, is it reasonable, can people do it, and how would they do it if that's what's expected. Plus, since this is a reference, no one is bound to it actually. Plus, it's a minimal type inventory, because the authors themselves even say you can add more to it, depending on the tasks that you are trying to have your students perform, etc., etc. You see what I'm saying? So that's like minimal. That's not maximum. Okay. And here's like how the second primary source is divided into spoken and written, and it's balanced. Is 11.5 million of spoken text and the same of written text. So it's like a good reference, corpus reference, I think. Okay. Questions about this? And so we've talked about the Giggle corpus, and the numbers I have are from the first edition, but there have been two in the meantime, and they cover all the way to 2010. So it's like current vocabulary. And here's what will need to happen, like conversion from types to lemmas here, because of this. Here we have lemmas, but we might need to do analysis with types, so we have to convert them back to types, and with all the inflections. And here it's text, it's newswire text, so it has to be converted into types and then to lemmas. And only these lists are categorized by notions, so that puts the semantic element into the database. So here's an idea of all these notions, general notions, and then specific notions, and I put some examples. I put them in English immediately so you'd get an idea of what kinds of words you might find there. And the proportion based on the frequency dictionary lemmas. So here you have about 28% of the most frequent words are in that category. And then you have specific notions, and the rest, so about 72% of the most frequent words are in those categories. Okay? Yes?
It seems to me that the notions would be much more important when assessing somebody's productive capacity, speaking and writing, than the types or the lemmas or anything like that. Because if you tell me that you saw my glasses, I left my glasses somewhere, and you said, oh, I saw them on the steps.
Mm-hmm.
I have to know that steps is analogous to stairs. You say, I have to know that specific thing.
Yeah.
Whereas when I am telling you, I'm producing that knowledge, and I saw that you left your glasses, I get the choice of whichever one I know that relates to that notion.
Right.
So it seems to me that you almost have to, when you assess an individual, use a different taxonomy for the vocabulary based on whether it's productive or receptive.
Right, but I'm not even going there yet. I want to see what, yeah.
I'm looking at the relative percentages of these different notions. I'm just wondering if that's just happenstance, that there seems to be more of one than another, or if that's just a reality, if we talk more about those things, or if we're more expressive about certain categories.
See, the didactic experts that came up with notions have relied on, what's been traditionally done, what's been traditionally taught, what learners have been able to come up with in terms of vocabulary that they've used and to perform certain tasks.
Okay.
But it wasn't a corpus-based type, so that's why the study, to compare and see if what they've produced is validated by large corpora.
So what would happen if the relative percentages are different in, say, the Giga newswire than from the French dictionary lemma counts in terms of relative frequency? Do you have the capacity to even go through that Giga newswire and look through the 1 billion types
Yeah,
of
we were going to
lemmas?
analyze it and convert it into types and lemmas.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Bless
that's
you.
part of the work. So I mean, it's to make sure, as the rationale, as I said, is learners who want to get to the advanced stage have to have some kind of foundation, vocabulary foundation. And I want to see whether the profiles are going to give them that foundation, or whether they need more. What else would they need? Can these corpora inform us of some of the words that are missing that could be added to the profiles?
So is the goal to move the teaching of the French language to more authentic usages and lemmas and whatnot? Because traditionally it's been done a certain way, and we don't know if that's still current. Is that your goal?
Partly, but the other goal is to see if I can get to a body of words that, if taught in a progressive fashion, would get a learner faster to the advanced level.
That's amazing. Okay, thank you.
Okay, because of course in the corpora there are words like fork, or some very common words that you would use that are not even there. So yeah, of course, if you want to teach fork to your students, definitely do, especially if they're going to be, you know, at a hotel or in a restaurant and they need one or whatever. Yes.
Who determines that body of thought that forms the transitional form from one level to another level to another level?
Yeah, who determines that?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. There's no real theory, and it happens to, it seems to happen more randomly than in a very well organized fashion.
Right. The reason
So
why I
if
asked
there's
that,
a little bit more accounting as to, you know, what words should be taught first, or and what words should be taught next, maybe there we might be able to visualize a little more in what sequence
That's right.
the words could be taught.
The reason why I ask is in the Chinese educational system today, in the context of English, they have levels in the English learning process. Level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. There's a standardized determinant of how you acquaint yourself with the first level to another level, then then you pass those exams to move into the next level.
Right.
So how could we apply? Is it applicable to this system? That's what I'm saying.
I'm not sure I understand everything you said, but
So, I think he's asking, will your analysis talk about the progressions at each level?
yes, because it will attempt to do so, because I'm going to be looking at overlap by proficiency level, also by register, by frequency. So it should get at that. And
What's
more
interesting is
specifically.
that it's not like a skill it's not, you can't draw tight boundaries around these
Skill sets.
skill sets.
exactly.
And it is progressive, and so
Right.
what you're doing will help to organize the progressions
Right.
in skill. That's very interesting.
Yeah, because even for testing, you know, what do you test if you don't know what vocabulary to test on, for example? And most of the tests involve vocabulary. So,
Okay, just another,
yeah.
this is an off-the-walls question. How do you handle slang and,
Specialized language.
for instance,
It's the highest frequency used.
because like in Arabic, I think Jeremy, correct me on this, there's the formal version of the language, and then there's what they talk on the street, and the two really aren't very similar.
Right.
In
So-
every language, you speak formal Spanish on the street, and they think you're kind of funny.
Right. So I categorize it as specialized language that you can learn. You know, you can have a special course on slang, the Paris slang, the Marseille slang, the Montreal slang, whatever, you know, French we're talking about, and a regional type area, because you would have to account for that too. Yes.
So given your goal, how would you compare what you hope to have at the end with what is currently happening right now? When a textbook writer...
Okay, I'm going to continue and then maybe I'll answer your questions, because we only have like 15 minutes left. And so here are some of the preliminary results that I found. So you see this monstrous number of types. So these are types now. And with the threshold, it's diminished like 10% right there. And these are all the types when including the three gigaword frequency dictionary and profiles. And so P stands for profile. So here are the types for the profiles. So there are like less than 7,000 lemmas. Sorry, you're right. Less than 7,000 lemmas, but when you count all the inflections, that's what you get. 100. And then for the frequency dictionary, there are 5,000 most frequent words, but when you count all the inflections, that's what you get. So learners don't speak in lemmas. You know that. They use types, and tokens. So what do we teach the students, lemmas or types? Given the French vocabulary mass, what words are useful and should be learned first? That's what I'm trying to get at. And what lemmas and types should teachers teach first? And here now we are going to look at the overlap. So for the proficiency versus the frequency dictionary, you see the overlap. So that's the frequency dictionary, and that's all the profile. So you see there's an overlap. So what's in the profile but not in the dictionary would be the green area right there. And you have some examples. So all the types of the frequency dictionary are almost in the profiles, but there's lots of words in the profiles that are not the most frequent words. Okay. So I'm going to go quickly through this because that's what I'm going to be doing over the next weeks. So here's the overlap of the proficiency of the profile versus the frequency. Oh, I showed you that. Okay, now here's the overlap of the profiles versus the gigaword corpus. So that's all the types for the overlap right there. And what's in the profiles but not in gigaword is right here, and here are some examples. And the comparison shows words teachers think should be taught but that end up not being used, like the passé composé, some older forms that you see in the Book of Mormon, but that no one ever uses in oral language, so just things of that nature. So that's what you see. Here the overlap of the giga word versus the frequency dictionary. So that's the overlap right here. What's in the frequency dictionary but not in gigaword, this is that many types, and here are some examples. So the frequency dictionary says they are important words, however, they can't be found in gigaword. So what do you do with that? So I'm going to try to see what the logic behind that is. And here's the core. So the overlap of all three, that's the number of types. That's quite a few. However, it only represents 8.2% of all possible types from all the three bodies of words. Okay? And as I said, many inflected verbal forms with an average of 23:1 ratio, because there are many inflections, verbal, especially verbal inflections in the French language. And here's what's not overlapping, unique to the profiles. So there are that many types unique to the profiles. So when should they be taught? And are they just pet words for instruction for teachers, or is there more to it? And here are some examples. And then there's the lemma. The lemma counts, which, as you remember, the lemma is like the representative of a whole group by part of speech. Lemmas are a common way to present vocabulary to learners in dictionaries and glossaries, but more needs to be done to learn French, right? So here's the overlap of the profiles, lemmas versus the giga word types. So after lematizations, we still end up with a good amount of words not used in giga words. So they're not necessarily the most frequent words that you could be using. And they could represent quite a number. See, these are lemmas, 545 lemmas. They could represent a whole year of instruction. Right? There again, the overlap between the profiles and the frequency dictionary we've already seen, and it's almost totally overlapping, so it's validating the profiles. However, there are all these words there that are not included in the most frequent words. Okay? So these words are above. These words here are above the dictionary of 5,000 ranking. So when should they be taught? That's some of the. These are some of the questions I'm asking myself, and I'm trying to answer. And here's the core overlap for lemmas. So it's pretty good. It's almost all the frequency dictionary, 5,000 words. Okay, so that's a summary. I'm looking at types and lemmas. I'm doing all these analysis, and I still have lots to do, as you can tell. And hopefully it will be useful for the authors of the profiles, for the Council of Europe Language Policy Division, for test developers, for teachers, for learners. And I want to improve the lower proficiency French word base in relation to coverage, so readers of French can get up to speed much faster, hopefully, and improve the quantification of vocabulary growth, and promote corpus linguistics methodology for the analysis of vocabulary content.